Welcome to AI Book Highlights.
Today we're looking at a really interesting one. Good Fat is Good for Women Menopause by Elizabeth Bright.
Yeah, and this isn't your standard menopause guide, is it? It really challenges some core beliefs, especially around diet.
Definitely. The author questions a lot of conventional wisdom, particularly about fat, and digs into the history of how we even think about menopause.
So expect some maybe surprising ideas and hopefully some useful insights that might shift how you see this whole transition.
Absolutely. Let's get into the first highlight. The author starts pretty personally, talking about the whole vilification of saturated fat.
Right. She brings up her mother's experience back in the, mid-20th century, following that low-fat, high-carb advice.
Exactly. The advice linked to the cholesterol hypothesis, the book specifically mentions Ansel Keys.
Ah, yes, the seven-country study, which, has faced a lot of questions since
So a
then.
lot of questions, but his ideas were influential, and women were told basically avoid saturated fat, use vegetable oils instead, for heart health.
And the author makes a pretty stark connection, doesn't she, between that advice and her mother's health later in life.
She does. She mentions her mother developing Alzheimer's and osteoporosis at 82 and wonders, about the impact of decades of that low-fat diet.
It's quite confronting. And she even reflects on her own choices, raising her kids.
Yeah, trying to do the right thing with the low-fat baby food, high-carb stuff, and now questioning if that might have impacted their blood sugar, maybe
Yeah.
even contributed to, anxiety or depression later.
So it really sets the stage for questioning this fundamental idea that saturated fat is the enemy, especially for women.
Precisely. It makes you pause and think about those long-held dietary rules.
Okay, so from diet history, the book shifts focus to menopause itself. The argument is that it's not an illness.
Exactly. Not a disease to be cured, but a natural, even necessary evolutionary step, which is pretty radical compared to how it's often portrayed.
It's fascinating that the book points out it's pretty rare in the animal kingdom, right? Just humans, orcas, pilot whales.
Yeah, just those few. It suggests there's an evolutionary reason for it. And the author emphasizes that historically, or in some cultures, menopause wasn't always this big drama filled with terrible symptoms.
She mentions Mary Putnam Jacoby back in 1895, linking severe symptoms more to stress, maybe poor diet, having kids close together.
Right, suggesting external factors played a big role, not just the hormonal change itself. And there was even a survey in the 1920s in England and Scotland by women doctors challenging the idea that menopause was inherently dangerous.
So this leads into the grandmother hypothesis.
The idea that by stopping reproduction, older women could help ensure the survival of their grandchildren, which actually benefits the whole group's longevity. It flips the script, really.
From decline to contribution. Okay,
Wow.
so if it's potentially this natural, even beneficial process, how did it become so heavily medicalized?
Well, the book argues that the rise of endocrinology, the study of hormones, was a key turning point. Suddenly, we could measure hormones.
And define normal levels, presumably.
Exactly. And then you see things like hysterectomies, removing ovaries, becoming more common. The book even hints at financial motives sometimes playing a part historically.
And then came the drugs.
Then came the drugs, synthetic estrogens like DES, which had its own issues, and then conjugated estrogens like Premarin, derived from horse urine, marketed heavily from the mid-20th century.
Yeah, the book talks about really aggressive advertising campaigns, doesn't it? Selling menopause as basically an estrogen deficiency disease.
Totally. Framing it as something that needed fixing to stay feminine or avoid aging. That book, Feminine Forever, by Robert Wilson, was apparently huge for Premarin sales.
And later, the industry sort of co-opted medical language to push hormone therapy for preventing things like osteoporosis, too.
It's a powerful look at how narratives around health can be shaped, by commercial interests.
Definitely. Which sets up the next challenge in the book, questioning that core idea of estrogen deficiency being the whole story.
Right. The author argues that's too simplistic. She highlights the role of the adrenal glands.
Okay, so not just the ovaries.
Not just the ovaries. After menopause, the adrenal glands can actually take over some estrogen production. They make androgens, and an enzyme called aromatase converts them to estrogen.
So the body has a kind of backup system.
Sort of, yeah. A built-in mechanism that the intense focus on ovarian estrogen decline might have overshadowed. The author suggests we haven't fully appreciated this adrenal function.
So she's saying menopausal symptoms might be less about just low estrogen and more about an overall imbalance.
Pretty much. An imbalance in the whole endocrine system, often made worse by things like chronic stress, poor diet, that kind of thing. Maybe the adrenals are already overworked from stress, so they can't compensate effectively.
And the book mentions the discovery of adrenal hormones lagged behind reproductive ones historically.
Yeah, which might explain why the focus stayed so strongly on the ovaries for so long.
Okay, this all leads directly into the book's main thesis then, the importance of dietary fat, good fat.
Yes, good fat, especially saturated fat. This is the core argument. It's essential for women's health, including during menopause.
How so? What's the mechanism?
Well, fat isn't just for energy, it's crucial for building cell membranes, and critically, it's the precursor for all steroid hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, even vitamin D. You need fat, specifically cholesterol, to make them.
So she contrasts these natural animal fats, butter, lard, tallow, with processed vegetable oils, and of course refined carbohydrates.
Big contrast. She argues the processed oils and high carbs contribute to inflammation and mess with your endocrine balance, your hormones, whereas natural fats support it.
And she brings up a ketogenic approach, high fat, low carb.
She does, suggesting that lowering carbs and increasing healthy fats can potentially help manage menopausal symptoms by lowering cortisol, that stress hormone, improving how your body handles insulin, and reducing overall inflammation.
It connects back to that idea of endocrine balance.
Exactly. And she even touches on the big historical picture, the shift from, potentially more fat-rich hunter-gatherer diets to the carb-heavy diets that came with agriculture, and how that might have impacted women's health over millennia.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to reconsider.
Yeah.
So based on all this, let's talk practical takeaways. What's the first actionable step?
Takeaway number 1 is pretty straightforward. Reevaluate your relationship with dietary fat. Don't just assume it's bad.
So maybe consciously include more healthy fat sources. The book mentions butter, coconut oil, lard, eggs, fatty fish.
Right. Be mindful of the types of fat. Prioritize whole, unprocessed sources over those industrial seed oils. And maybe, just maybe, explore reducing refined carbs and see how you feel.
Observe your own body's response. Okay, takeaway number 2.
This one's more about perspective. Understand menopause as a natural transition, not necessarily a disease. Challenge those negative narratives.
Be critical of the doom and gloom portrayals you might see in media or, in drug company marketing.
Exactly. Seek out information, maybe communities that offer more positive, empowering views of this life stage. Try to shift your own internal narrative about it.
Good advice. And the final takeaway, number 3.
Prioritize stress management for endocrine balance. This connects back to the adrenal glands. Recognize how much stress impacts your hormones.
Because if your adrenals are constantly pumping out cortisol due to stress,
They might have less capacity to handle other jobs, like supporting estrogen production post-menopause. So implement stress-reducing practices. Whatever works for you, deep breathing, getting enough sleep, gentle movement, mindfulness.
pay attention to your body's signals and how your whole lifestyle, diet, stress, sleep might be affecting your endocrine system overall.
That's the key. It's holistic.
So that gives you a sense of the key ideas in Good Fat is Good for Women Menopause. It's definitely a thought-provoking read.
It really offers a different lens on women's health, diet, and how history and marketing have shaped our views.
Thank you for joining us for this exploration.
If these highlights got you thinking, and you want to dive deeper into Elizabeth Bright's arguments, her reasoning, her specific recommendations,
You can find a link to purchase the book right there in the description below.